Consider this article before switching to Neovim. Let's consider it together. Why don't we? Consider this article before switching to Neovim. Why and for what reason did you switch to Neovim and VS Code? Okay. I'm an active Linux user, and my favorite IDEs are Neovim and VS Code. I always recommend both Neovim and VS Code to everyone, but I'm not saying that I never use VS Code anymore. I installed VS Code as my first IDE to write and run my first program. I, too, as a Neovim user, still have VS Code installed for some odd things here and there, but let's go see what his reasoning for leaving it is, or maybe his reasoning for not using it. We'll see. The current article is not a tutorial. It shares my journey about switching from VS Code to Neovim and then back from Neovim to VS Code. Oh, he went back. Well, that's interesting. Okay. With my story, in the end, your mind is also evident on whether you need to leave VS Code to start using Neovim or stick with VS Code. Why did I give up on VS Code and start Neovim? I switched to VS Code, and there is one reason, and that's performance. VS Code is slow. It takes too many resources, and sometimes the VS Code tab is stuck, and you need to close VS Code and reopen it. Yeah, I've experienced that. It lags hard sometimes, but you're running a whole operating system when you fire up oh my gosh, what's it called? An Electron window. You're firing up basically a whole operating system when you fire up Electron, a whole VM in your machine basically. But suppose you have a small or low RAM and storage machine or laptop. Then VS Code is a nightmare for you, primarily when you work with large projects, especially in front-end development. I will say I have never opened a project that has brought VS Code to its knees. I the virtual scrolling works pretty well actually. It's similar to Sublime Text virtual scroll. It works pretty well, and there's no noticeable lag when I open super large files, whereas I have hit the buffer limit of Neovim, like the length buffer limit. There's an end limit to how many characters you can have in there, but I haven't run into that with VS Code, which is interesting. I wonder what the difference is in the data structures they're using, but maybe they're doing virtual scrolling, not only up and down, but maybe to side as well. That would be interesting. But anyway, a good example is when you work on large projects and your tech stack is based on React.js, TypeScript, Yarn, and NPM. I wouldn't use both of these at once. I would just pick one. One or the other. Whatever your team's using, use that. Is a nightmare for you. That is why I started looking for alternatives to the VS Code. I found Vim and Neovim to be good alternatives in terms of speed and performance. They take fewer resources, RAM, CPU, etc., than VS Code. They do overall. But once you start getting into language servers, I've noticed that there's some element of, at least on the .NET side, and the TypeScript, JavaScript side, once you introduce a language server, your usage is similar. It's better. It's a lot better. But once you get 4 or 5 instances open, your computer's wrecked. Whereas, okay, you can get 2 or 3 with VS Code, and then your computer's wrecked. So, switching to VS Code to Neovim is a challenging task. Everybody knows about it. VS Code gives you ease in terms of configuration, installation, and uses. In Neovim, to configure, you need to learn one more language, Lua, which you will never use in another project. You probably should use Lua in more projects. It's pretty good. I didn't think I was gonna like it as much as I did. When I started configuring Neovim, I thought, what is this? Why is it a scripting language? And then after some time, I was like, okay, you can do function. There's like callbacks and stuff that you can do, and it makes it so where you can just invoke things. And there's hooks all over the place where you can hook in functions to plugins and stuff, and like maybe invoke another plugin, or go read a file, or go make a network call. Even like you can do whatever you want in Lua. It really makes it to where it is the most customizable option. When you use something like VS Code, you need some sort of other plugin to go invoke that other thing, and that's got to be written in TypeScript or JavaScript and compiled to TypeScript, or the other way around, whatever. Um, so I think having the language which you configure the editor be the same language in which you write the plugins is kind of a powerful idea. I'm on board with that. After trying it out, I think it's good. I do think that JSON is used more places, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. It's better than XML for the most part, but I don't see why that would be a downside. But anyway, let's keep rolling here. So configuring everything else from scratch in Neovim is time consuming, stressful, and a headache. Likely Neovim community built frameworks like LazyVim, AstroVim, NVChad, LunarVim, etc. I have not tried any of these. I'm using the lazy.nvim package manager, but I'm not using any of the distributions quite yet. So we'll see. I may try them out later, but I've set it up on a server. I've set it up on two Windows machines, WSL, and the server was a Linux box, and then another Linux box, and another Linux box, and I haven't had issues. The biggest problem has been the language servers, and for the most part, Mason handles that for me, and so I don't have to worry about it too much. I the friction of installing my config on a new machine is basically down to cloning the Git packet, or the cloning the Git repo into the Neovim config folder, and then running Vim, and then installing lazy.nvim. I think it even does that. I think I even have code in there to download it. I think that's what they recommended doing. That most package managers have that, but um, it just sets it up, and you just restart it a couple times, and it installs all its stuff. Tree Sitter installs itself. Mason installs whatever you tell it to install by default. Like, it just, for the most part, once you have a config that works, like, you can take that config elsewhere. I will say, I have found that that process of setting up the config and personalizing it, that took a good month. But I was also learning Neovim at the time. Like, I tried to do the Vim motion thing first, added little bits to my Neovim config because I was using the Neovim plugin in VS Code, so I could build my Neovim config as I was learning the motions. And then once I was ready, I basically cut off the VS Code part and just started using Neovim proper. And then by that time, I had pretty much my whole config laid out already for me. Everything was working. So, um, using the Neovim framework, you can configure Neovim in less than 5 minutes. Uh, so the 5 minutes is a lot better than the month I took. I'll give them that. But there's probably a lot that you just didn't need in there. There's probably some performance differences. Granted, lazy makes that much better. Like, if you don't use the thing, lazy doesn't load it. So that's a great thing. That's probably why they built it the way they did. Why am I not recommending Neovim to everyone? I, just right off the bat, before we read this, do not recommend Neovim to everyone. I recommend it to people who feel like their code editing process is slow. To anyone who feels like they want to take their code editing to be more advanced, faster, if they have issues with their wrists, like are your hands hurting? Like I've like these three fingers, um, after like a long day of work before I started using Vim, would start to tingle and go numb, and I was like dropping things. If you're starting to get some of that, and I'm too young for that, but if you're starting to get some of that, then it's time to probably consider Vim Motions to start. And then if you really like that and you're having problems with maybe the editors and how tightly integrated they are, then you can move on to things like going to Neovim proper. But I just, it's not for everybody. Like the motions just don't make sense right off the bat, and if you don't have the time to invest in it right off the bat, then it's not going to work out for you. So I do agree, it's not for everyone. But I know everyone says Neovim is not for beginners. Yes, I agree with that. I think I, I think you can, like, if you're a beginner and you're not good at typing at all, maybe starting with it is probably a good idea. Maybe. But setting it up, like, start with the motions. Don't start with the Neovim the editor. That's a bad plan. But start with emotions in a code editor. That might actually be a good idea. So, yes, I agree with that. But the correct wording is for Neovim. Neovim is not for VS Code users. I discovered some major problems with Neovim. The installation process, no plugin manager ecosystem. There are plugin managers. Lazy is one of them. No UI and dashboard. I consider that a plus. I don't need it. Dependency on third party open source. So does VS Code. Hard to configure. Fair. Fair. Language configuration and support. If he's talking LSPs, that can get complicated sometimes. If you're just talking highlighting, that's not complicated at all. Tree sitter. Once you install tree sitter, like this get the highlighting portion at least, and the tree parsing stuff, like that all just works. So, but let's go through these gripes he has one by one. Okay. The installation process is not one click. For example, in VS Code, you download the VS Code file and install it. In Neovim first, you install Vim. But in Neovim first, you need to install Vim. No, you don't. I, no, you don't need Vim. If you're gonna go Neovim, you don't need Vim. This is just wrong. Um, then you can install Neovim on your laptop for beginner developers. It's tricky and sometimes developers are confused. One thing I want to point out is that when you're installing it, I found better luck using the nightly than I did the stable version. The plugin compatibility was just better with the nightly. Your mileage may vary, but I've run on the nightly. I have run into a couple of issues, like Lua line is broken for me right now, but I haven't run into any showstoppers. So your mileage may vary, but that's what I'd recommend. No plugin manager ecosystem. Neovim has no plugin ecosystem similar to VS Code or any other IDE. Installing any plugin in Neovim is a challenging process. First, you need to install the plugin manager for Neovim. Yeah. So there is plugin management ecosystems, because you have to install them. So there's many plugin managers out there. I like Lazy and Vim. I started with Packer. I moved to the PKCR, but that was kind of slow because it didn't compile my stuff. But Lazy and Vim has been good. It's polished. It's nice. It works. But the plugin ecosystem is different from VS Code. VS Code has a central repository where you install plugins from, and that repository is owned and operated by Microsoft. It's kind of similar to an NPM or Cargo or crates.io or whatever, NuGet.org. It's similar to all of those. Neovim takes the approach that Go does. All the plugins are Git repos. So you're not, while most of those plugins do live in GitHub, there's nothing specifically tying you to GitHub for pulling down plugins. You could go to GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever you wanted. So you're not tied to one platform, which is nice. I like the fact that I can have that option, and I kind of like using Git for package management. It seems like this is the second time I've seen it done. I mean, Go being the first, and I've really liked them both times. I think that is the way for libraries. I think for at least for, well, I can't even say at least for interpreted languages because Go isn't interpreted, but I think it's a good strategy. I think Git is a good way to go. Um, uh, the next big problem is related to. Do we go over that? We skipped some. But there is a problem in the market. Many plugin managers are available, and developers are confused about which one to select. If you're lucky, you install the plugin manager according to your requirements. Use Lazy. I think you can use Plug too. Plug might be. The one to pick right now is lazy.nvim. It just is. Packer's gone. They're out of support, so that just really leaves Lazy and PKCR, and PKCR isn't finished. The next big problem is related to the plugin itself. The plugin installation is very tricky due to the number of plugin managers. Every plugin cannot support every plugin manager. I haven't run into Neovim plugins that don't work in both Packer. I took an entire Packer setup, converted it to PCKR, or yeah, I think it's PCKR, not NVIM. Converted it to that, which granted was supposed to be compatible. And then I converted that over to lazy.nvim, and all of them worked. I just, all my plugins worked in both. Anything I needed anyway. I don't remember anything that didn't work when in that conversion process. So even though they don't tell you what to set up in there or how to set it up, it the the plugins should work. There should be a way to make them work. It may take a little bit of tinkering if it has a lot of hooks and stuff to set up. Maybe like you have to like do things in a little bit different of a way, but overall they should just work. In VS Code, the developer finds the plugin with the search bar and installs it with one click. Paste in code, restart your editor, or put it in the search bar, click download, restart your editor. It's the same. I just I don't see a whole lot of difference. One's a GUI, so it maybe feels a little bit better for most people. I think there is something comforting about a GUI. Like it really does at first anyway. A GUI makes you feel better. I don't know. It's just how that works. Um, it's what most of the computing experience people have is in. So I think GUIs make you feel better. But I think if you sat down and you had a person who had never seen a GUI and never seen a terminal, and you did it with them, I don't think there would be as much of a difference as you think. I think there would be a small difference. I think the GUI would win out at least for ease of use in the long run. But I think that once you've learned the concepts, I don't think it matters. I don't I don't think I don't think it matters as much as people think. I think familiarity has a big aspect of it. That was my experience anyway. Like I came from the Visual Studio world, and that was all just really really familiar to me. So that probably had something to do with it. No UI and dashboard. Every person or developer in 2023 depends on a dashboard or a UI. I don't know what you mean by a dashboard. Maybe like the file tree, file picker, or UI. Neovim does not give you any dashboard or UI. If you need to install the plugin, if you need, you install to plug in. Oh my gosh, I can't read. If you need to install the plugin. If you need to install the plugin. There we go. The best example of this is the sidebar. It's an effortless functionality if you need that, or you need to install the Nvim tree plugin. I did, when I first switched over, I put the Nvim tree plugin in Neovim, and then after a while I realized, once I had Harpoon and Telescope set up, um, I realized how little I used it, and I realized how cumbersome it was to swap over, pick my file, open it, and then worry about like buffers getting weird and stuff. It was way simpler to just get rid of it, and eventually I just yanked it out of my config, and I've been really happy ever since. I don't need it. It's a waste of space. It's distracting. If I need a tree finder, I have netrw there with this, just like a single key press away, and then I can open, create, delete, whatever in netrw. Like, it took a little bit of time to learn all the commands in netrw, but again, once you do, it's way faster and it's as good or better. So um, Neovim is a well-known IDE, but the truth is that Neovim relies on third-party open source. Yes, it is third-party. Neovim is open source, but it relies on other pieces to make that a coherent whole. Yes. For any extra functionality you require, such as a sidebar or search bar, you need to install a plugin. The plugin is a third-party open source project managed by an open source contributor. Yep. Sometimes one plugin depends on another plugin. Suppose something happens in one plugin that affects the entire ecosystem as well. You can get the same thing in VS Code. Like, the same thing happens, like one plugin underneath breaks and the rest of the plugins break, and then you're just up a creek. I have dealt with many broken VS Code plugins. I think the only experience I've had that hasn't been as janky, I think Neovim's been just a little bit better than VS Code, but believe it or not, the better one has been my experience installing plugins in Visual Studio. That still has weird crashes and causes your editor to lock up and your IDE to lock up. But I think those end up being more polished than VS Code, and Neovim's more polished than VS Code is as well. I think VS Code plugins are really buggy. I'm restarting language servers constantly. I'm restarting plugins. I'm restarting my editor, reloading my window because weird things are happening. I was hitting all sorts of issues. So I mean, by the time I was in there and I was thinking about switching, I was like, a lot of people are saying it's a lot of configuring. I'm already debugging LSPs. I'm already viewing logs out of all this stuff and trying to figure out what's going on in both Visual Studio and VS Code. So I'm like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, you're gonna, once you outpace at least just the first layer of plugins, like you're already gonna be in that realm as well, in whatever editor you're gonna be in. So I don't think this is a great argument either. Hard to configure and install plugins and themes. Configuring Neovim is a challenging task. You cannot start working with Neovim after the installation is finished. For example, I mean, you just won't have anything. For example, without prior knowledge, you can easily understand the basic functionality of toggling the sidebar, installing and removing plugin search bar in VS Code. In Neovim's case, you must learn everything and configure it according to the requirements. I think the only reason that this is easy is because it's easy in other editors as well, and a lot of the things are the same. So it's just familiarity, which has value. Familiarity has value. So I won't discount that, but I, it's fine in both. In UMM's case, you must learn everything and configure it according to the requirements. Yep. I mean, you will learn more about how your editor works. You will learn a lot more about how LSPs work, how debug adapter protocol works. You'll learn how, I mean, you won't learn a ton, but you'll learn a little bit how like tree syntax parsing works. how the AST works with your tree. You can even you can go as deep as you want, but it won't hide those things from you, which can be helpful in certain places when you need to fix something. Having access to the thing really helps. Whereas in like VS Code, you might not get access to that thing's logs. I mean, it might just be going to some buffer somewhere in memory and you might not get it. So lack of language server support, especially for non-famous languages, for example, handlebars, etc. There's no handlebar. Okay. There's no handlebars one. Mason handlebars. There's a linter for handlebars. Glint. Set of tools. Oh, that's the Glimmer VM. Oh, that's gonna be oh my gosh. Embers, I think. Yeah, so there's a linter that supports it, and then there's Glint. I bet there's a way to set up handlebars in Tree Sitter. I bet there's support for it. You probably have to map the file type in your config, but outside of that, I bet it just works. So I we'll see what else we got here. If language server is available for Neovim, then configuring the language server in Neovim is a challenging task, especially if you're new to Neovim. Not with LSP 0 and Mason. Like it's not hard. It's like you type that list I just showed you. You search for your language server, you install it, and then you go. Like and if it doesn't work out of that, maybe there's some little config stuff you have to put in your LSP config. It's usually like 5 or 6 lines, and then that's it. So I don't think it's not a huge deal either. Which one should you choose, Neovim or VS Code? For new developers, I'm always recommending to go with VS Code. But if your laptop has low RAM CPU power, for example, 2 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes RAM, I strongly recommend using Neovim with NVChat or LazyVim in that case. I don't agree with that. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Like you can get Neovim to use tons of memory and tons of CPU too if you really want to. Like if you're installing all the same plugins that you need, I mean you'll end up there. I don't think that's super valid unless you're just not installing any plugins, which nobody ever does. Everybody installs plugins in VS Code. They install plugins in Neovim too. So I think you'll end up in the same boat. But Code consumes a lot of resources, CPU, power, battery, and RAM compared to Neovim. Haha, just wait till you try Visual Studio or JetBrains. If you think these two are bad, try those. It does not give productivity to day-to-day life. Not when you're starting out. But over time, as you get better at it, it really does. It makes a difference. And it starts to feel a lot better. Even today, when I use VS Code, especially for large projects, it consumes lots of resources and gives me headaches. Again, try IntelliJ or Visual Studio. Each year, a new IDE appears. For example, Zed, Lapis, Fleet. Zed might be an interesting one to try. I might try that one if Windows support lands or Linux support. I don't know if Linux support exists yet. It might, but Neovim does not only compete with new IDE, but also with old IDE like VS Code, etc. In the current situation, the future is dark. Okay. I know Neovim built a strong cult around a developer. Lots of developers switch back to VS Code. I think it's fair to like you start in Vim, you get frustrated, you go back to VS Code, and then you go back, and then there's this cycle that happens for a little while, and then once you'll hit that point where you're like, oh, I get it, and then from then on, you'll be like, I don't need that other one anymore. A lot of online IDEs provide VS Code or similar functionality. You can use Mosh and then get even more flexibility than online IDEs. Or, I mean, SSH. I like Mosh just because connectivity can be bad. But GitHub also offers inbuilt VS Code. I mean, you can do the same thing. You can open any repository with online VS Code. And with a $5 additional Ocean droplet, you can do it much cheaper than CodeSpaces can. CodeSpaces, if you want any of that compute, you're gonna need to pay for it. And I'd argue that going the SSH route leaves even more resources on a low power machines. So $5 a month, you can develop on a box in the cloud, or you can develop on a server in your closet, your old gaming computer, across the world, whatever. It's all just shell access. So I the whole IDE in the browser thing is weird to me now. I used to like it. I used to think it was cool, but if you can do the same thing over SSH, oh, why reinvent the wheel? Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, but so GitHub also offers inbuilt VS Code. You can open any repository online with VS Code. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I didn't get. I wanted more, as far as like the ending as to. I guess we got the reasons why he switched away. We didn't get the reasons why he switched to it, which I would have liked to have gotten that part of the journey as well. Like I said, I had those issues where I felt like I could be faster, and just the regular default motions where like control and the arrow keys, and like I'm moving my hands all over the place, and like it just wasn't, and using like home and end keys, it wasn't as efficient as I felt like it could be. And then eventually I just switched over, and I really like it. I don't have any other motions or anything that I wish I had now. I can just do it. I can just go someplace without touching my mouse, which is great. So, but it's really interesting. Overall, I liked the article. I felt like I wanted a little more, like I said, on that element. I wanted a little more conclusion, but it's good. It's good. You should go follow. You should go follow him. Rajdeep Singh on Twitter if you feel so inclined. But this was a good article overall. All right. If you liked the video, press the subscribe button, and drop a comment below if you think I'm wrong, or if you think I'm right. Have a good day.